So what if type 2 diabetes wasn't this life sentence we've been told it is? What if it was actually a condition that could be reversed? That's the huge, provocative question at the very heart of Dr. Joel Fuhrman's book, The End of Diabetes. In this explainer, we're going to break down his really radical approach that pretty much challenges decades of medical thinking. So how does he propose we do it? Let's dive in.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at just how big this problem is. Then, we'll get into the book's main claim about diabetes being reversible. After that, we'll unpack the science behind his diet, see what that plan actually looks like on a plate, and finally, we'll look at the incredible results the book says are possible.
So, first things first, why is a new approach so desperately needed? Well, the book paints a picture of the diabetes dilemma as, frankly, a massive public health crisis, and it points to a future that is pretty darn scary.
Get this, the book highlights this wild projection that if we stay on the same path, 1 out of every 3 American adults could have diabetes by the year 2050. I mean, just think about that. A statistic like that really sets the stage for the book's core argument. Whatever we're doing right now, it's just not working.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the book's frustration with the whole system. Dr. Fuhrman basically argues that conventional medicine is stuck in a loop of managing symptoms, just controlling blood sugar with more and more medication, instead of actually trying to get rid of the disease by tackling its root cause.
And that idea right there leads us straight to the book's most radical claim, one that really goes head-to-head with a lot of conventional medical thinking.
The book essentially puts this question right in front of you. And for millions of people, that diagnosis feels exactly like that. A permanent downhill slide that you can only try to manage, but never really beat.
And here it is, the core thesis of the entire book. Type 2 diabetes is not a life sentence. Dr. Fuhrman completely reframes it. He says it's a disease caused first and foremost by diet, and because of that, it's a disease that can be reversed by radically changing that diet. This is the huge paradigm shift his whole philosophy is built on.
But okay, how? Right? If diet is both the problem and the solution, what's the actual operating principle? Well, this brings us to the simple scientific formula that's behind the entire philosophy.
It all comes down to this simple little equation. H equals N over C. Health equals nutrients divided by calories. The whole idea is that the real value of food isn't the calorie number. It's how many micronutrients, we're talking vitamins, minerals, all those good things, it delivers per calorie. The book says these micronutrients are what your cells need to work right and to heal. So the goal is simple: get the most nutrients for the fewest empty calories.
And this idea creates a really clear dividing line. On one side, you've got your champions, the high nutrient density foods like leafy greens and berries, which are just packed with the good stuff but low in calories. And on the other side, you've got the low nutrient density foods like processed junk, white flour, things that give you tons of calories but almost none of the essential building blocks your body is actually begging for. This whole concept even changes how we think about being hungry. The book makes a huge distinction between true hunger, which is your body's calm, normal signal for fuel, and something it calls toxic hunger. Fuhrman argues that this toxic hunger isn't really hunger at all. It's basically withdrawal symptoms from a bad diet. The headaches, the fatigue, the shakes, and what makes it go away? Eating more of the same junk food, which just creates this vicious, addictive cycle.
Okay, so if H equals N over C is the big idea, what does that actually look like when you sit down to eat? Let's get into the practical blueprint of what the book calls the Nutritarian diet. So the foundation is all about maximizing that nutrient density. We're talking huge amounts of green vegetables, at least a cup of beans or legumes every single day, and making sure to get in things like onions and mushrooms for their unique health benefits. The plan also pushes for fresh fruits and gets its healthy fats from whole foods like nuts and seeds.
And just as important is the stuff the book says you have to get rid of, or at least seriously limit. This means pretty much all processed foods, those refined carbs like white flour and sugar, and all added oils. The plan also calls for cutting way back on animal products, or for some people, cutting them out completely.
And man, this comparison really shows you the difference in philosophies. The book points to a typical breakfast recommendation with processed grains, added fats, dairy, and then you look at the Nutritarian option, which is built entirely from whole foods, oats, berries, nuts, seeds, all designed to maximize that nutrient-to-calorie ratio from the very start of the day.
And now for the big question, right? What does the book claim actually happens when people follow this blueprint?
This next part is all about the results from case studies and patient stories shared in the book.
One of the most mind-blowing stats in the book comes from a published case series. A whopping 90% of the people in the study were reportedly able to either completely get off or drastically reduce their diabetes medication. And it wasn't just that. The book also says that key blood sugar markers like HbA1c dropped right down into the normal, non-diabetic range for the average person in the study.
To really see what this looks like for an individual, the book tells the story of Jane, and the before picture is grim. 248 pounds, a super high HbA1c, on multiple blood pressure meds and even needing a wheelchair. The after is just a total transformation. Her weight dropped to 131 pounds, her HbA1c was in the non-diabetic range, she was off all blood pressure meds, and she was able to walk on a treadmill. It's just a really powerful story that brings the book's claims to life.
So really, the whole argument just boils down to this one major shift in perspective. It's about moving the focus away from just counting calories to focusing on nutrient quality. The whole idea is that if you flood your body with the best micronutrients possible, you're giving it the tools it needs to become what Fuhrman calls a miraculous self-healing machine.
Now, this is so important to point out. The book itself has this major disclaimer right in it. Because these dietary changes are described as being so effective at lowering blood sugar, the author warns that trying this without a doctor's supervision can actually be dangerous. The book really stresses that you'll need to adjust medications and that absolutely has to be done with a physician who knows what they're doing.
So in the end, this deep dive into the end of diabetes really leaves us with a powerful question. The core message is to completely reframe how we look at food, to see it not just as fuel to get through the day, but as the single most powerful tool we have to shape our health. And whether you're on board with the whole approach or not, it forces you to ask, what could change if we really, truly started seeing our next meal as our best medicine?